Hi, this is Vinny. In today's video, we're going to review two dive computers from the Italian brand Ratio. One is the oversized sort of big form factor model called the iX3M2, and the other is the more traditional wristwatch size form factor model called the iDive Color. The specific models I have are the Pro version in the iX3M2 and the Easy version in the iDive. Each of these two computers has three models of variants. The entry level on both is called the Pro for the iX3M2 and the Easy for the iDive Color. The mid-tier unit for both these computers is called the Deep, and the top-end unit is called Tech. Ratio also has a variant of the iDive called the Sport, which is pretty much the same computer as the iDive Color, except that it has a black and white display. You can upgrade between any of the from one model to a next higher model just by paying for a software license. The hardware on the computer is exactly the same. You purchase an upgrade code from Ratio, you go to the Toolbox app, you enter that code, and boom, your computer is upgraded. So you don't need to buy a new computer if your needs change. So that's pretty cool. The Ratio also has a GPS variant. So it's got the same three models, the Pro, the Deep, and the Tech, but with GPS enabled. However, you cannot upgrade from the non-GPS model to the GPS model. So if you think you want GPS as a feature set in your dive computer, get the GPS variant to begin with. I particularly like Ratio's approach to minimalist packaging. The dive computers come in a box made of recycled cardboard. Inside, you have the dive computer, obviously. In the iX3M2 box, you have the charging cable, and you have a warranty card, and you have bungee straps if you prefer to use those instead of an elastic strap. The iDive Color packaging similarly has the computer itself. It's got a longer strap for use with a dry suit or a thicker wetsuit. It's got a warranty card, and somewhere in there's also a charging cable. So as you can see, there's not a lot of wasted packaging and extraneous materials that just end up in the landfill. So chapeau to Ratio for that. Let's start by reviewing the standard features common to both dive computers. Both computers have a nitrox mode. Both computers have a gauge and free diving modes. Both computers have a dive planner, and this is a tech-style dive planner, which is slightly different from what you find on most other computers. And I'll talk about it more when I get into the user interface section. But the short version is that most dive computers give you an NDL for different depths. What the iX3M2's planning mode does is, for a given depth, it gives you NDL as well as deco tables. Both computers have a full set of alarms, depth, time, deco limit, and MOD. The iX3M2 has three different types of alarms. It's got a visual alarm where you get a display on your screen. You have an audio alarm where the computer beeps, and you have a vibrate mode as well. The iDive Color doesn't have the vibrate mode. Both computers allow 6 different conservative options. There's a default and 5 other settings. Both computers have a logbook mode where you can actually review the dives that you've done. Both computers let you sync your dive computer with a desktop or laptop. You can do this either by using a cable or via Bluetooth. And both computers have rechargeable batteries and have a stated battery life of about 20 hours. Based on my experience, I don't know whether you'll get 20 hours or not, but you should definitely be able to get a week of diving with an iX3M2 and at least 4 or 5 days of diving with the iDive Color. And the last thing, both dive computers have automatic altitude adjustment. They have a barometric gauge built in that measures the atmospheric pressure, and when you go up to altitude, it basically factors in the lower atmospheric pressure at altitude and adjusts your algorithm accordingly. That's a fairly standard feature list. Every dive computer in the market these days has that. So what sets these computers apart? Now, let's discuss some advanced features of these computers. The first of these is a compass. If you've taken a course with me, you know that I'm a big believer in divers being fully self-sufficient and not relying on other people for their safety. A compass goes a long way towards achieving this. If you have a compass, you're able to be oriented on the site, you know which way to go and you're not reliant on a dive guide to sort of, handhold you along the dive site. Both dive computers do have a compass. The iX3M2's compass is marked as high accuracy and also having a greater ability to handle tilt. The iDive Color does not mention this high accuracy component. That being said, I don't think this is such a big deal. For recreational diving, you don't necessarily need super high levels of precision. As long as you have a compass, that's plenty good. The other cool feature about both these dive computers is that they're air integrated. What that means is there's a transmitter that attaches to your cylinder and it transmits the air pressure directly to your computer. So when you're diving, you don't need to look at your computer and your SPG. You just look at your computer, you can get your depth, you can get your time, you can get your no decompression information, you can get how much air you have in your tank, and you can also get how much time you have till you reach 50 bar based on your current depth and air consumption rate, which is pretty cool. Both these computers let you use multiple transmitters, allowing you to track the pressure of different tanks. In the iX3M2 series, you can track 3, or 10 tanks depending on which model you have, i.e. the Pro, Deep or Tech. And with the iDive color, you can track 2, 3 or 10 cylinders depending on whether you have the Easy, Deep or Tech model. Both computers are tech enabled. In other words, they're suitable for deco dives. They don't punish you if you go into decompression. Implied expectation is that if you go into deco, you know what you're doing. So it's not a license for a recreational diver without tech training to actually go into deco. So be aware of that. Both computers let you dive with trimix. However, you need the deep variant in both models for normoxic trimix and need the tech variant in both models for full trimix, i.e. including hypoxic trimix. Both computers let you use multiple gas mixes that you can switch around between during dives. The iX3M2 lets you use 3 gas mixes in the first 2 models and up to 10 gas mixes in the top end model. Now 3 is a really useful number. If you're doing open circuit tech on air, 3 gas mixes lets you dive pretty much any sort of air profile that makes sense. The iDive color only allows 2 gas mixes and the base model, and quite honestly that's only useful for kind of like for light tech, let's say. If you plan to do any kind of extended tech diving, you'll probably want to accelerate your deco and you need 2 tanks for that. In other words, 3 gas mixes. And to get 3 gas mixes in the iDive color, you have to go to the intermediate model, which is the deep model. And of course, even with the iDive color, once you get to the top tech model, you get a whopping 10 gas mixes. Now let's talk about customizable conservatism. In other words, the ability to set the gradient factors exactly the way you want, or the critical bubble size if you're using the VPM model. In both the dive computers, you need the top end variant, which is the tech model, in order to be able to choose your own gradient factors. To be honest, I'm not very thrilled about the idea of needing to scale up to the top model in order to get the ability to set your own gradient factors. To be clear, for recreational diving, it doesn't matter. Most recreational divers don't know what a gradient factor is and don't really need the ability to set custom gradient factors. Having 3 or 4 conservative settings, like these computers do, is more than enough. However, for computers designed for technical diving, specifically the iX3M2, I find it a bit jarring that people cannot set their own gradient factors, if for no other reason than to match what their buddies are doing with their Garmins or Shearwaters or whatever. And I hope that this is something Ratio fixes with a future software upgrade or something. Both computers let you customize your safety stop. In other words, you don't have to do 5 meters, you can choose 6 meters if you want, or 5.5 meters or whatever. And you can also choose the duration of your safety stop, whether you want 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. Both computers do have a CCR mode available, but in the top end tech variant only. And finally, deep stops. They are available as an optional extra on each computer if you want. You can either switch it on or off as you so prefer. And lastly, if you're a tech diver, you have the option of setting your final deco stop to be either 6 meters or 3 meters. Now, let's talk about some unique features that set Ratio dive computers apart from other brands. The first and the coolest one is a color-coded transmitter. Here, the transmitter has an LED, and depending on the tank pressure, the LED flashes a different color. So when the diver has more than 100 bar of air in the tank, the LED flashes green. When the diver has between 50 and 100 bar, the LED flashes yellow. And when the air pressure drops below 50 bar, the LED flashes red. The second accessory is something that I consider super cool. What Ratio has done is they've built a nitrox analyzer that integrates with the dive computer. So one end of it has the same plug that's used to charge your dive computer. The other end has an actual proper nitrox analyzer. So what you do is you attach one end to your dive computer, you take the other end, and you analyze your nitrox like you would. And once the analysis is done, it transmits the nitrox information directly to your computer so you can save it. Now, is this necessary? Of course not. But now that I know this exists, my life is incomplete without it. The third super cool feature is something called the multi-tank mode. This is going to be of particular interest to people who dive side mount. And the way it works is you take 2 transmitters, you attach them to each of your side mount cylinders, and the computer will automatically track which cylinder you're breathing and give you the air information for that cylinder. However, because it knows which two cylinders you're using for side mount, it'll give you it gives you a remaining bottom time based on the combined air volume of both cylinders. That is really, really smart. I think it's a great feature, and it takes away a lot of sort of the guesswork and math of when you're managing multiple tanks. The last cool feature on these computers is a gas blender mode. This is available only on the iX3M2 series, not on the iDive Color. What this is essentially an app that lets you fill a tank to a certain mix. You specify the residual mix and tank pressure, and your target mix and target pressure, and what it basically tells you is how to fill the tank to achieve that. Normally people use desktop apps or phone apps to do this, but having this on your computer is kind of handy. And now let's talk about the core of a dive computer, its algorithm. Let's start with the algorithm of the base models. The Pro version uses the Buhlmann ZHL16C algorithm, which is sort of the industry standard for dive computers. The Easy model uses the Buhlmann ZHL16B, which to be honest is a little bit surprising. The 16B algorithm was mainly designed for use with dive tables, and is actually a little bit less conservative than the default 16C that's used worldwide these days. Higher end models give you a few more algorithms to work with. For the iX3M2, with the deep and tech variants, you get the Buhlmann Z2, you get the ZHL16B again if you want it for some reason, and you get the VPMB model. With the upper two trims of the iDive Color, you also get the VPMB model, but you don't get any more Buhlmann alternatives. But let's see what this translates to into actual sort of NDL bottom time that you obtain when diving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the NDLs of different models for a range of depths. To keep things consistent, I've chosen a gradient factor of 1990 on computers where I can set them, or conservatism setting 1 on the ratio computers, which corresponds to the same gradient factors of 1990. So first, let's look at the Buhlmann ZHL16C models and see what different computers do there. So what I've done is I'm comparing the NDLs from 3 different models. One is using the software called Decoplanner, one is using my Shearwater Perdix, and one is using the iX3M2. Now if you look at the differences here, you will see that at 15 meters, both the Decoplanner and iX3M2 are fairly consistent with each other. It's the Perdix that is significantly more conservative. At 18 meters, all 3 models are fairly different. At 21 meters, the Perdix and the iX3M2 are more or less close to each other, while Decoplanner is a little bit more liberal. And once you get past that to 24 meters, the difference becomes fairly small. The iX3M2 is slightly more conservative, but not hugely so. And at 27 or 30 meters, the difference is virtually non-existent. Let's also look at the ZHL16B and see how that model stacks up. And again here, I've used Decoplanner as one alternative and the iDive as the second. Here you'll see that across the board, the iDive Color is more conservative than Decoplanner, despite both of them using the same algorithm set to the same conservatism settings. As an aside, I do find it interesting how different devices using the same algorithm set to the same conservatism setting or same gradient factors turns out different numbers here. So what this indicates is that every computer manufacturer takes the standard Buhlmann model and massages it to some degree when they implement it in their device. Of more relevance to us would be how the two computers match up to each other. How does the ratios implementation of the Buhlmann 16C compare to that of the 16B? And here, if you look at it, you see that the differences between the two models are very, very negligible. There's a 3-minute difference at 15 meters, but once you get past that, it's a minute here, a minute there. So in other words, even though both computers are using different algorithms, the way they implement them means that the difference in your actual dive time is going to be fairly negligible. Let's start with the iX3M2. The first thing you'll note is that it's a fairly chunky beast. Compared to the Shearwater Perdix, which is a fairly large computer to begin with, it's massive. Now to turn it on, we just press any button. Now if you look at this screen, you'll notice there's a lot of information here. It kind of took me aback when I first saw it. I'm like, why is there so much information here? Overload. But once I started thinking about it, I was like, it's actually not so bad, right? You have your date and you have your time. You have the basic sort of what's your computer setting, it's open circuit, salt, and what's my conservatism setting. You know whether you're diving on air or nitrox. And this is actually quite useful to know because one of the common mistakes people make is that they don't set their computer to the right mix. So seeing this here is quite useful. And well, then you have other stuff which I don't necessarily need to know as much, which is the ambient pressure and temperature. I mean, okay, it's not bad, but the only complaint I have is that maybe the labeling here could be a bit smaller, and maybe the part with open circuit, etc., could be a bit larger. But in the end, that's a fairly minor issue. Now, if you've just got the computer, like I said, once you turn it on, this is the screen that you'll see. Let's figure out how to actually go through the settings. I've actually not read the manual when I'm doing this, so for me as well, it's going to be the first time. It's kind of useful to get a sense of how intuitive it is. Right here, there are 4 buttons, and you can see each of them has a label: main, system, compass, view. Let's start with main. Okay, so this brings up something called dive sets 1, 2, a mix table, an app menu, a planner, a logbook, and an alarm setting. And the labels are fairly clear: back, enter, up, down. So okay, let's see what dive sets 1 is, and I press enter. And these are your dive settings, whether you're diving in saltwater, freshwater, whether you're going to be in scuba mode, free diving mode, or gauge mode, what algorithm you're using, and what's your conservative setting. And deco control is basically how the computer responds if you end up missing deco going into deco. Okay, now let's go back and see the next one. I'm going to scroll down to the second setting, dive sets 2. Here it lets you define the safety stop time and the depth at which you want to do the safety stop. If you still believe in deep stops, you can choose to do one here. If you're a tech diver and you want to decide where to set your maximum your last deco stop at 6 meters or 3 meters, you can do that here. And surface interval basically defines at what point you turn your computer ends the dive. All right, let's go down further. Mix table. It lets you enter, as you know, the 3 default mixes that you can use with the Ratio Pro. It lets you define each of these mixes. App menu, let's see what that does. Okay, this is the mix analyzer and the gas blender. And I've talked about these features in the review, so this is what it is. Then the last function here is basically your typical planner app. So what it does, it lets you enter your plan depth and your dive time, and it basically evaluates sort of what you have. Let's take an example of this. Let's say I'll just use the defaults here. I want to go to 18 meters for 10 minutes. Let's say, okay, let's say I make it change it to 20 and dive for 10 minutes. If I hit evaluate, what it does, it tells me if I dive to 20 meters for 10 minutes, my NDL is actually 28 minutes. I'll have 1% CNS toxicity. I'll use 4 O2 units, and I'll need 583 liters of air based on sort of my saved air consumption rate. Pretty handy. You'll notice that this is slightly different from a typical dive computer. Most dive computers in the planning mode will just simply give you the NDL for different depths. What this does is, it does give you the NDL, but for your plan depth. It doesn't give you NDL for range of depth. So I can't go to look at the planning mode and say, okay, how much time do I have at 25 meters? How much time do I have at 28 meters? And so on and so forth. I have to pick a specific depth and a dive time, and it lets me plan. It gives me sort of the output there. So this is more of a tech approach to dive planning. In other words, you have a specific depth and time goal in mind, and the computer basically tells you how to achieve that goal, either via a no decompression dive or via a dive involving decompression. Hand to heart, for recreational diving, I would actually prefer the other method, where you have a list of depths and NDL for each. But this isn't a bad this isn't a bad approach either, and it does force the diver to be a little bit more disciplined about the dive planning. Let's get back. How do we get back? We'll press all the buttons. Okay, this is back, and then logbook is pretty simple. That should give you a log of your last dive, and you can scroll through and see all your different dives. And alarms basically lets you set your different alarms. So you can choose an alarm for ascent speed. You can choose an alarm for MOD. You can choose an alarm for gas reserve. This only works obviously if you have an air transmitter. You can choose an alarm for deco violation. You can choose a depth alarm and a time alarm. So pretty much a full set of alarm options out there. So that covers the main menu. Now let's look at what happens when you enter the system option. The system option basically lets me adjust the displays. It basically, how bright do I want it, rotation, at what depth the computer comes on, your dive colors. It lets you adjust what color you want the data to show in, and the labels to show in, and the menu colors to show in. This is kind of useful, especially for people who might be colorblind or have limited sort of ability to discern certain colors. Then you have general sets. Oh, this sounds interesting. General settings is basically your time. You can actually have two sets of times here, including a GMT or a second time zone. You can set both of them here. You can set your format and and whether you want metric or imperial. You want metric. PC mode is for connecting it to your computer, either via Bluetooth or by cable. Sorry, I just went out of here. Let me show you where we. Yeah. Transmitter mode is for lets you pair different transmitters to it. Compass, it basically lets you calibrate your compass. Default lets you switch your computer back to default mode. Info lets you see all the information about your computer, and switch off basically turns the computer off. All right, compass. Let me see. I wonder what this does. Oh look, it brings up the compass. Surprise, surprise. Okay, here we are. And the last thing is view. So view basically shows you what you would see in your computer when you're diving. As you can see, it's a fairly easy computer to set. The labels for the buttons make it very intuitive to understand what button to press to achieve what. And all the functions and settings are very clearly labeled. Now let's look at the iDive Touch. Like the iX3M2, this also has 4 buttons. The only difference is that these buttons are not labeled. So you are going to have to look up the manual to understand what they do. This is enter, this is back, this is up, this is down. So once you know what the buttons mean, it's actually a fairly intuitive interface to use. To turn on the screen, I'm going to press the enter button. Now, once I have the unit on, to go into the main menu, I press enter again. This brings up the main menu and the various settings options that the computer has. Now, let's go through each of them in turn. To enter the first one, I can scroll through the settings by pressing down or by pressing up. So let's start with the first setting. Here, I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. This is to give you an idea of how the computer is laid out. So this lets you change the backlight settings. It lets you change when the computer goes to sleep and how sensitive it is to movement when you turn it back on. And then there's a whole bunch of labels and displays that you can change the color of. So you can change the color of the data. You can change the color of the labels. You can change the color of the alarm, the low priority, the medium priority, and the high priority alarms. You can also change the color of the menu. You can change the color of the menu items. And you can change the color of the menu select option, the way it is right now. The next option is your general settings. When I go into that, you can change the units, go with metric or imperial, choose life, choose metric. You can basically set the reference pressure for sea level, which I don't really see why you would want to change this, but it's there. You can reset your computer to go into default mode, or you can turn your unit off. Scroll on to the next option. This lets you put your computer to PC mode for downloading and your dive data. This lets you pair different transmitters to the unit. The next ratio is for the next menu options for your compass. You can calibrate your compass or even use it if you want. Info basically gives you the software version and other relevant info about your unit. Alarms, that lets you set just an alarm like you would on any smartwatch. Daytime time lets you set the daytime time. Well, that's pretty obvious. You also have the ability to set a second time zone if you so choose. So you'll notice these are all watch-related functional general setup options. What about dive options, you ask? Well, for that it gets a bit tricky. You got to go to the home mode, and then you got to press the down arrow. And once that is done, now you press the enter key. That brings up the dive menu. So once you're in the dive menu, you have a bunch of options here. The first one is your logbook option. This lets you see your dive logs, what you've done. You can see a visual representation of your dive. You can see how deep you've been, average depth, and all that stuff. Blah blah blah. The next option lets you set your gas mixes. So I can set, like the default iDive color easy version has 2 gas mixes. You can set both of them here. You can see, here you can see I'm on mix 1. Below that is mix 2. I can see each of them if I want. This next one brings up your dive settings. So you can set whether you're diving in saltwater or freshwater. You can choose your dive mode, whether it's scuba, whether it is free diving or gauge mode. You can choose your algorithm. Do note that the choice of algorithms is only available in the deep and tech model, not in the base easy model. You can choose your conservatism setting. So in my case, I've set it to conservative setting of 1, 0 being the default, and you can go up to 5. You can set your deco control here. Deco control basically means how the computer behaves when you go into deco and if you miss some deco. You can set your safety stop at what time and depth you want your safety stop to happen. You can also set deep stop if you so desire. And somewhere George Irvine is crying because you have a choice of setting your last deco stop at either 6 meters or 3 meters. So these are all your dive settings. Then the next option, you can set up your alarms. Unlike the iX3M2, you only have 2 types of alarms here. You have a visual alarm, which is always on, and you have a choice of a buzzer, which you can turn on and off. The iX3M2 also has a vibration mode. So anyway, I can choose to turn the buzzer on and off. I can choose to set an alarm for ascent speed. I can choose to set an alarm for exceeding my MOD, for deco violation, for a total dive time alarm, a maximum depth alarm, and a gas reserve alarm. This obviously, the last one will only work if you have a matching transmitter. And the last one is your planner. Here too, just like the iX3M2, the planner mode is slightly different. In most dive computers, your planner mode basically shows you a range of depths and your NDL for each depth. For this, you actually have to choose a depth. You have to choose a planned dive time, and then you run it, and it spits out your dive plan. I actually prefer the other method for recreational diving, where you're not really locked into a specific depth as much. But like I said, strengthen the pros and cons to each approach. Anyway, once this is done, you can get out of this by pressing the back. You get to the home screen, and you're ready to go diving. Well, as we've seen so far, ratio dive computers come with a feature list that includes everything one can ask for, and some stuff that we didn't even think to ask, but are happy to have regardless. But the best spec sheet is worthless if the computer is hard to use in the field. To test this out, I took the computers out for a test dive over a weekend camp that we were conducting in Pondicherry. A few things stood out to me. First, legibility was excellent. Even in the soup-like conditions that we were blessed with, there were no issues reading the display, even for my sadly aging eyes. Second, the battery life was also excellent. The iX3M2 will easily last a week without needing a charge. While the iDive Color also has a stated battery life of 20 hours, I'm not so sure you'll actually get 20 hours of dive time with it, especially if you wear it as a watch as well. Realistically speaking, you should be able to get 4-5 days of usage out of it before needing a charge. Although that'll depend a little bit on usage, and whether you have transmitters, etc. In terms of usability, the iX3M2 was very intuitive to use, and the displays were very sensibly organized and easy to understand. And that's true for the secondary displays as well. The iDive Color was a bit more of a mixed bag. It relied a lot on icons to label the data, and it wasn't always easy to understand what those icons meant. But that's a compromise you make with a feature-rich dive computer packed into a tiny wristwatch-sized form factor. There's a lot of info, and there's only so much space for it. In the end, familiarity with the computer will help you get over these issues. The one thing I did notice with both computers is how restrictive they were in the safety stop. The Shearwater, for example, lets you do your safety stop anywhere between 3 and 8 meters. And that's great for avoiding like a crowd of divers all hanging around at 5 meters. And it's also nice for letting you get a couple of extra minutes of underwater photography time. The ratio, on the other hand, was uncharacteristically non-Italian. Hey! If you strayed materially away from 5 meters, it would stop the safety stop. So you have to be a lot more disciplined about your depth when doing a safety stop with the ratio. Other than that, both computers did pretty much exactly what is expected with reasonable decode times and no crazy Looney Tunes behavior, which is more than I can say for the couple of other units I will not name. So in summary, would I recommend the ratio dive computers, and if so, to whom? Before I do, I recommend people read my buying guide to dive computers. There's a link to that in the text description associated with this video. This article will provide you with context on what to prioritize in a dive computer, especially if you're on a budget. Getting back to ratios, let's start with the iX3M2. This is a very easy computer to recommend, pretty much to anyone looking for a robust, feature-rich computer that they can use for a very long time, which pretty much means everybody. For most people, the Pro model should be more than sufficient, and if your needs evolve to include rebreathers or trimix, you can always unlock additional features via a paid software upgrade. About the only downside is that you're stuck to pre-cooked gradient factors until you get to the tech variant. However, the only time you will need to obsess about gradient factors is if you're doing hypoxic trimix. And if you're doing hypoxic trimix, you're at the tech level computer anyway. So all this hand-wringing by me regarding gradient factors is a little bit moot, I have to admit. The iDive color is a bit more need specific. It is a very feature-rich computer, and while you can get full tech capabilities on this, the small screen is not conducive to serious tech diving. In other words, if you want to do serious, hardcore tech diving, this is not the computer you're looking for. And this is also why the pre-cooked gradient factors or the whole Bullman ZHL 16B versus 16C argument becomes a little bit of an academic curiosity. I recommend the iDive color primarily for recreational divers who want a watch-size feature-rich computer that can also scale up to do a little bit of tech, maybe 45 meters, single tank, single decode tank, and so on and so forth. And of course, if you're a side mount diver, the ability of ratios to combine multiple transmitters and allow seamless automatic gas switches between tanks makes them a very compelling purchase candidate. Yes, my hair has grown and I have grown a beard between the start of this video and the end of this. That's kind of how long it's taken me to shoot this. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed the video.